Hey everybody, can everybody hear me? Oh wow, okay, that's pretty loud. I'm not gonna do my usual yelling. My name is David Wang. I'm Chief Innovation Officer at Cooley. Thank you so much for having us here today, and thank you to our sponsors and to Berkeley, of course, for hosting this wonderful event. We are gonna jump right in here, and today this topic, we're gonna try to get at the substance of what is actually happening inside legal departments. We're going to try to have some real talk, right? What's actually going on, and we'll have some amazing and very varied perspectives here. So I'm going to first have my esteemed panelists introduce themselves, starting from Nisha.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Nisha Ramachandran. I'm currently the General Counsel at Signifyd. We're an e-commerce fraud prevention platform. We work with large merchants like Walmart and Samsung to make e-commerce both safe and fast.
I'm Brian Levey. As of last month, I was the Chief Business Affairs and Chief Legal Officer at Upwork, which is one of the largest talent marketplaces out there for independent professionals to connect with businesses of all sizes around the globe.
Great. My name is Clayton McDonnell. I'm the president of the corporate segment at Thomson Reuters, and we help global business leaders navigate the complexity out there with regulations. And we help them with solutions that are AI-powered and content-driven. Our portfolio includes legal, tax, trade, and risk products. And I'm going to say a little bit more personally about myself. I'm a double bear. So I'm a JD MBA, and thank you very much. And I ended up practicing law, corporate and securities law in San Francisco, and then became in-house counsel at Apple Computer and Cisco Systems. And one other fun fact is that I was the commencement speaker for the graduating class of 21 and 22 MBA High School.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, we definitely got some bears in here, right? Okay, so before we start, of course, I will do the lawyerly thing and say that our opinions are those of our own and not that of our employers, because I think this is a really interesting topic that is really at an inflection point right now. I think when you go out and you talk to folks in the market and you talk to your peers, everybody seems to be saying something slightly different, right? It's like everybody's trying to figure out, okay, what's real, what's hype, where are we on the hype curve? How do we get at what's going on? And so with that, we're gonna first start talking about, okay, what are you seeing? What do you see that's working? So, as part of my job, I have a lot of conversations with general counsel and, working with our clients. And you can really see that there's very different places on the adoption curve that people have going from company to company, as well as in the larger legal departments within the department. You would have situations where, within the department, one particular function would be very high on the AI curve. Often that's like contract management or something like that. And then you would have another end of the department, often, but not always, litigation, right? Where they're like, oh, I heard about these fake AI citations. I'm not going anywhere near that. And in fact, I'm going to tell my outside counsel not to go anywhere near that as well, right? So we're going to try to cover all of these topics if we have time. But first, we're going to start with what are you seeing from your vantage point in terms of what in-house departments are doing. So with that, Nisha, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to. And maybe just for a little bit of context, Signifyd is a predictive model we offer. That's our core offering to our merchant customers. And so we've been in this space for the last decade. We sell to enterprise customers, and we know the space very, very well. So I will just say, I think my experience is a little bit different in that, I had a company that was sort of chomping at the bit with all the new technologies. And so we've spent really the last 2 years getting everybody else and the rest of the department up to speed. And I think this is the first year, actually, the legal team has now had the time to kind of look inward and say, well, what do we want to do? And I think within my department, we're still very much in the phase of experimentation. I mean, David, one of the things that you mentioned, I'm curious to hear what everyone else has to say, is that we really are adopting fast in areas that are repeatable, scalable, and also where we don't feel like there's a lot of risk. So NDAs are a great example. I mean, we have really just gone full-fledged into running every single NDA we get through an AI tool. It spits out a summary, and we're able to, flip those much faster, really with half the time and speed that we were previously. But that is kind of what we're seeing within our departments. It's really repeatable, where there's low risk, and we think we can cut time and make ourselves more efficient.
Yeah, I think our experience at Upwork, at the company, unlike Nisha's company, it's a 20-plus-year-old company, formerly called Odesk and Elance, and they merged and created Upwork, probably 11 years ago or so now. So we've had to really pivot and create sort of an AI native ecosystem now, and really out of business necessity, the business, the product, the engineering teams really needed to pivot to do this, several years ago, beginning of 2023. It really started when the executive team essentially told, top product engineering people, how would we reinvent this business? Because if we're not going to reinvent it, someone else will and disrupt us. We work with a ton of AI, freelancing talent. They're on our marketplace. We have to be adaptable. We have to be valuable to them. And if not, we go away over time. So big business necessity. And then legal isn't necessarily a must-have on that chart and on that journey. We're certainly a nice to have. We're following the lead of the business, but we have to be there from a speed perspective, from a solutions perspective, approving the tools perspective. How do we create that speed to keep up with the business? We want to be seen as business folks who happen to be lawyers instead of the other way around. And I think we've had some success, not necessarily with AI tools per se, that have come from outside parties. We've had a lot more benefit and success early on from creating our own custom GPTs, for example. We have more control and customization there. It also certainly costs less. And we found it to be just more accurate in the near term. That doesn't mean that we haven't had some AI tools on the regulatory side that have worked better than what we could do internally, at least in tracking things. So whether it's FAQs for the business, DPA, data processing agreement, simplifying those processes and the like, we've certainly found some big benefits to this. And I would say we're more in the experimentation side. We've tested out pilots, but our initial conclusions are probably better off with our internal stuff for now and the custom GPTs, just based on our experience so far.
Well, it's interesting. So this is a slightly different perspective. I'll talk about sort of corporate law departments versus law firms when it comes to the adoption of AI. We did a study called Future of Professionals, and when we surveyed the respondents, 55% of the corporate legal departments were experimenting with a new AI tool. And that's in contrast to law firms, 40%. So it seems like corporate legal departments are ahead of the game. So I'll talk about our corporate legal department inside of Thomson Reuters. So you can imagine with an organization like ours, in terms of what we sell, we have in-house folks that we can experiment with in terms of our tools. And I would say that we cover the whole gamut of experimentation to scaling to optimization. We have some early adopters of tools inside the legal department, lawyers who are playing around with some of the large language models and creating their own sorts of tools, all within the supervision of our IT department, because that's what you also need to take into account, is that you got to satisfy and partner with those organizations too. And so they're experimenting there, and we set up some use cases, we set up the success criteria, and assuming that it achieves those success criteria, then we're on to scaling, aligning around those individuals in the organization that have similar use cases. Optimization for us is really about the fact that we solve business problems. We don't just solve legal problems or tax problems or trade problems. And so we have to work with other functional areas too. We'll probably cover with that later, but this is for the point of optimization means looking at those workflows. You may work with procurement and legal together when you're thinking about identifying a new supplier. You send out a contract, it comes back, there are red lines, the playbook that's uploaded into Counsel legal can help that procurement rep to do some negotiation, some basic level. But it gets to a level where it's more complex, that contract gets routed to the legal department, the appropriate individual. So optimization is really about, can you improve productivity, improve efficiency, reduce risk, reduce costs, unlock growth? And we found that our customers are on a similar journey. There's probably more on the experimentation side than those that are optimizing workflows. One other example is that HR and in a corporation is interested in making sure that they have policies that are up to date when it comes to how you serve employees. Well, Thomson Reuters had so many folks that were assigned to do some administrative work, trying to build these policies, stay up to date, especially around sick leave. 50 different states, 50 different sick leave policies. Well, the HR representative was able to use one of our tools called Practical Law, did a survey, identified what was in common with all those jurisdictions, and created one sick leave policy. Reduction in administrative costs, the ability to have a better experience for employees. So the other functional areas can leverage these tools too to help, once again, to achieve these goals. So it's a pretty exciting area to be in and to be able to see both sides, corporations and in-house counsel and also external counsel.
You know, it's interesting, right? So in this conversation, I think I hear two things, and I want to kind of dig into a little bit more, right? One is, where is the drive coming from, and why is driving at? And then I want to talk a little bit about more of the specific tools and things that you see working, or the nature of things that work versus don't work, especially like what Brian talked about, right? In terms of custom GPTs versus outside tools. I want to dig into that a little bit more. Can I just get a real quick show of hands, audience participation? Please raise your hand if you in your organization, there is a top-down push for all functions, including for legal, to adopt more AI. Can you see? Can I see? And can you raise your hand if you are in a legal department or legal adjacent function and you are pushing yourself to get more AI adoption? They could overlap. Right, so pretty high, right? And so I think this is something that we see in the market, right? Very common that regardless of what kind of company background you come from, AI native tech companies or more traditional enterprises, that there is kind of this push across enterprise. Sometimes it will come top down, sometimes it comes from the department itself. The best cases, of course, when you got both, when it's easier to make progress, right? So that, I think that's one thing that we see. But one, on the actual what we do part of it, I want to dig in a little bit more to Brian, what you're talking about. Why do you think it's better, what you've seen, it's better for a custom GPT so far than a specific tool from the outside? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think, and excuse me, I referenced this a little. I think it's that control customization. What we also found was that the advice provided by the third-party tool was actually more conservative than we would have provided. The guidance and the advice we would give our internal clients or even our end customers was actually more conservative from the tool, because the tool doesn't necessarily have the nuance and the context of our business. So that was a real aha moment for us. But I think we also found that some of the tools didn't necessarily keep to the framework that we had preset with some parameters too. So we're a little surprised and jarred by that. Again, it's still early days for these tools, and I expect them to get better over time. But we've definitely had sort of top-down, but also internally driven, because we see that it's going to help us ease our workflows. It's going to free up time to do more strategic work, which is what we definitely need right now, especially for the repeatable stuff that's lower or medium risk. So that's another way for the legal team to be more strategic and to be seen as a department of how, is what we like to call it at Upwork, as opposed to a department of know. How can we be that strategic partner along the way? And by freeing up some more of our time, we can be that strategic partner a lot more. And David, you mentioned where has it also been successful? Commercial contract side, we've been able to have some pretty powerful GPTs. FAQs, really trying to make privacy and compliance issues more plain English for the employee base. Repeatable questions that just come up for HR and the like. collaborating with the HR team on that. But that's sort of my sense. Obviously very powerful. And I think it makes us all, it moves us more from specialists at what we do on our teams, in the in-house legal team, to more generalists too. It also creates a dynamic that I find the engineers and the product folks are coming to us much more educated because they're looking up items in advance through their own use of AI. And I think overall that's a good development. They can appreciate some of the issues we deal with in a more nuanced fashion.
What about you, Nisha?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Brian, I feel that we have a very similar overlap into where we're using AI tools and technology. So very similar to you, contract management, FAQs, anything that the business is coming to us where we're going back and we have to dig up a contract or look through something. We are trying and pushing very hard to automate a lot of that because that is on a day-to-day, I think, what can sink a lot of legal teams is that you're going back and it's not really true legal work. It's rereading a contract or answering a question that otherwise could be easily answered. I think the one place where we differ really is that we have actually followed the tools and the proliferation of tools throughout the company. And I'll be honest here. Signifyd is a 550-person company. I have a 7-person legal team, so we're very, very lean. We serve very large global e-commerce merchants, and so some of it is a question of how much time and effort I'm able to put into adoption of new tools and technology. But one thing that we have found is that if we have gone out, I'll give an example, our sales team uses a tool where they can practice sales pitches, and we've loaded a lot of content into that tool so that they can play around and ask questions and they can get what our answers might be during the sales process. That has been really effective because they're already there. I don't have to tell them to come to the legal team's tool, figure out how to use it. So it's been effective for us to say, what's another department using? What could we do within that department's tool? And what is our current interaction with that department? So we followed a slightly different strategy, which is we just go where everybody else goes. It's also cost effective. So
yeah, and that's
at the end of the day, the bottom line is a little bit lower.
Well, I think that's a very common theme that we also hear often when we talk to our clients, right? Because there's legal-specific tools, and then often, especially in high-tech companies, and a lot of our clients are Cooley, of course, forefront at technology, is that it's a lower friction experience to adopt what another department has adopted or is being available enterprise-wide versus requiring your own tools. I mean, Laura, you're in the business of selling in specific tools. Like, what do you think about that problem? Like, and what would you say to the people that have that experience and say, like, why would you, you can give an objective answer and then also your opinionated answer.
All right. Well, I will say sort of the biased opinion is that when I was going to law school, Westlaw was the tool that we used. And for folks that had that experience, you grew up with it. But I would step back and look at the overall scheme. We are so lucky this day and age that there is a proliferation of tools and large language models that we can use with time, effort, resource, figure out something that is customized for you. I would just ask that you consider a few things as you make that selection. I think the first is paramount, and that's accuracy. How do you know that you're right? And that is one of the things that we applaud folks that are developing tools, but that is really critical when it comes to the delivery of legal services. And it's not just about the regulations out there. If you're a transactional lawyer and you have a force majeure clause, you're going to have to pay attention to regulations out there regarding disasters, emergencies, how those are handled, or confidentiality. You'll have to be up to speed on privacy laws. If you're creating your own tool, how do you know that? One of the things that Thomson Reuters holds highest, and many of our other companies in this field, is that we give you that level of assurance. Why? Because we spend $200 million a year in AI development. We have 100+ data scientists and AI engineers. We have 1,000 lawyers that are not doing agreements. They're making sure the content is right. And we have 3,500 content editors too. And so we know that it's right. when it goes out there. It is auditable, it is documented, there are citations. And so when you look at the tools that are out there, they're horizontal in nature, and we're very used to using them now because we actually do use them now. If you're Googling something, you'll have Gemini come up and offer up suggestions to you. But that's not necessarily professional grade AI, because we're in a profession and we're a license to practice law. And so we have a responsibility about that. And I'm assuming on my colleagues here, there's still human intervention. It's not that the tool exists and then all of a sudden folks create an agreement and it gets distributed out. And that's really important. The second piece of it is confidential information. And it depends on the architecture. It depends on the cloud hosting sort of mechanism that you have. And it depends on the data in terms of being assured that your data will stay within your four walls. And those types of assurances and ensuring that your confidential information is confidential is one of those hallmarks of some of these other organizations like ourselves, that this is the business in which we operate. I think the other thing is when you use one of these tools, these ChatGPT or other types of LLMs, it's important that you continuously evaluate them because they're always updating. What are we now in terms of ChatGPT 4.1 or 5, et cetera? Do you have the time, the effort, the resources, the skill set, the expertise to continually stay up to speed? You got to take a look at that and take that into consideration as you think about developing your own tools. And so with that assessment of it, when you apply that to your environment, it's something that we suggest to organizations like yourselves to have an AI committee that's able to do the assessment, put together rules, guidelines, policies associated with the development of tools. And that's not to say that at Thomson Reuters we don't develop our tools internally. We do. We have folks that's what they love to do. But take those considerations in mind. Is it accurate? How do you know that it's right? The confidential information, making sure that you assess and evaluate all of those technologies out there. So that's what we would say.
Yeah, I think we're all touching on different parts of this risk formula, right? I think, and of course, as lawyers, in fact, everybody up here is a lawyer, we're all constantly thinking about risk, right? And so how do you think about that risk and how do you handle risk within your department? I think this is something that I've found at least is very different from the outside counsel perspective compared to the in-house perspective. And since we're talking about in-house, I want to focus on the in-house perspective because from the outside counsel perspective, it's often you're trying to maximally eliminate risk. Right. I mean, the perfect answer is really you want to have the perfect answer, right? And when you go to your outside counsel on the strategic bet the company stuff, you're expecting it to be perfect. You hit every corner case. That's why we're hiring you to do that, right? When you're in-house, you have a different risk matrix, right? Brian, you kind of alluded to this, and Nisha as well, right? I think it's so. How do you guys think about risk? What is okay in terms of controlling the risk and offloading the risk? What do you see as not okay, or how do you want to control the risk? And another thing I would love if you could address while you're thinking about this is, the efficiency point, right? Because obviously, especially when CEOs and CFOs think about the legal department, they're like, wow, I wish our legal department could be more efficient, or whatever that means, right? But how do you get more efficient if you have to check the output of each of the things? Like there's some inherent assumption of risk, and really it's like, Laura, like you mentioned, right? Like what level of risk and what kind of risk do you assume, right? And there are lower friction, easier to adopt, maybe easier to use tools. Perhaps you're incrementally assuming a little bit more risk. Like how do you guys think about that topic?
I think, no, it's a great question. I mean, my boss at eBay back in the day used to say, if you don't take on any risk, you're not going to have a business. So, I like to think of things as far as our legal heat map. And on the one axis is the probability of something bad happening. On the other axis is what's the magnitude if something bad happens. And then what we try to do is map on that, what's high risk or high probability, high magnitude, focus in that quadrant. And then for the other quadrants, really try to think about things accordingly. So I think Laura mentioned, humans in the loop in this whole process. I think we'll put more attorney intervention in the AI process for the higher risk, top right quadrant, than certainly the lowest risk, lowest probability stuff, which we're going to be much less involved with. And that's sort of the framework that I like to think about when I'm thinking, how involved are we going to be? How much risk do we want to take? Ideally, we as a team are going to devote most of our resources to that upper right-hand quadrant, and we're going to reassess those risks every 6 months or so because those are dynamic in nature.
Yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, I feel like not much has changed in the way that I run the legal team or the department. And I think that is because in a lot of ways, in-house legal departments look like business units these days, and there's a lot of operational considerations that go into running the department. For example, we have a ticketing solution these days so that we're making sure that we're answering questions from the business in a timely fashion. And so I really think of it as we already know what the risks are. Those are places that we are never going to that is where I want my attorneys to be. And really what we're really doing with all of the tools that are available to us now is we are just trying to get more efficient at the operation of running the department. And it's shifting a better focus of where my attorneys need to be, which is the higher kind of heat map, high risk areas. And so I think that's why, in some ways, this conversation, a lot of where we're focused on is places we already know have low risk and are really just the places that are kind of bogging us down and preventing us from being in the heat map.
And I think a lot of what we do is also marketing with the business and the executive suite too. So if we can show the business that we're adding value, that we're actually not just enabling the business, but accelerating it, I think that makes us all look good. And we like to think about how we can incorporate AI to achieve that goal.
Yeah, I think there was a company I was on the board of that was an AI tool, but it was like contract management before generative AI. And all of the fancy features that we rolled out to customers, none of them hit as well as the one feature that turned out allowed the general counsel to show the other departments that in fact it was not us that was holding up the contract. It's that the counterparty didn't answer the question or that it's somebody else. Like that one feature ended up being the thing that sold it. It wasn't like reading the red line. It wasn't like producing it wasn't any of those things. It was actually the pain point of like how do you show value to the other parts of the business, right? And so, I think what you're hearing is that you have a gradient, right, of like, okay, well, so what are we seeing out there, right, in terms of adoption of AI in legal departments? I think what I see when I talk to our customers and what you've heard out here is that there's a gradient, and the folks that are most effective in adopting AI in their legal departments tend to be the ones that are actually most strategic and well organized about what they do in the legal department and how they think about their legal department. What have you identified the things and have you aligned with your internal teams on what is low risk and that you can accept the risk to accelerate on, right? NDAs being, of course, like the prototypical example. And then what I've seen folks have a lot of success with is to really focus fire on the biggest impact, lowest risk things, and to get successes there first to show the value to the business. And then once you address that, then you can look at, well, is a similar tool or something like that usable as we move up the spectrum, right? Going towards higher risk, and moving my human lawyers, right, into the higher risk zone, right? And then kind of moving kind of the lower risk, more routine, but tend to be more high volume stuff into kind of the automation zone. Right? Would you say that's a fair assessment, Laura?
No, I think
you have the last word.
It really is a fair sort of description of what's happening here. When you think about it, we do a lot of surveys. So the future of professionals, we talked to C-suite, and 80% of them said, this is a critical function that we're talking about here in the legal department. I just don't understand how they're delivering value. They're a cost center, aren't they? And so we think it's not just sort of an assessment of the value of the work, it's really being able to demonstrate that the legal department is aligned with the business priorities. And let me show you how we're doing that. Because legal departments are constrained by budget, by resources, limited. And so they're looking for tools and ways that you can address that, just as you said, to free up time to do that strategic value add work, to show that alignment with the business priorities, to become an advisor, a guide, a counsel. versus somebody that's focused on generating a bunch of agreements.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's what we all want to be, right? How do you differentiate yourself from the AI is that you actually have to do the strategic high-risk things that you can't do with AI. And so with that, that is the end of our time. Thank you so much for having us. If you join me, give me a hand for the panelists.